Thank you everybody for joining us. This is Jeff with IBPF. Today we have Julie Fast, who is the leading mental health expert on the topics of bipolar disorder, depression, and schizoaffective disorder. She is the best-selling author of Loving Someone with Bipolar Disorder, Take Charge of Bipolar Disorder, Get It Done When You're Depressed, Bipolar Happens, and the Health Cards Treatment System for Bipolar Disorder. Julie currently helps people understand the relationship between cannabis and bipolar disorder. Thank you, Julie.
Good morning. How is everybody today? Well, this is Julie Fast, and I'm here today to talk about the relationship that people have when they're a couple and one partner has bipolar disorder. It's quite an honor to work with the International Bipolar Foundation, such an important organization. I've known about them for many, many years, and it's great to finally be working with them as a team. Today, I'm going to start with a brief definition of bipolar disorder and sort of walk you through my morning before I did this webinar so that you can see how bipolar disorder affects those of us who have the illness. So I'm now in my 50s, and I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was 31. But my symptoms started at 16. And to be honest, I actually have the diagnosis of schizoaffective disorder. And what that means is that I have full-on bipolar disorder. I have bipolar 2. I have depression, anxiety, focus problems, irritation, anger, and a hypomania. That's bipolar 2. I also have just enormous amounts of panic attacks, OCD, all of that lovely stuff. But I also have a separate psychotic disorder, which means that I deal with a lot of paranoia. I hear voices, I see things. I deal with hallucinations and delusions. So a person who has bipolar disorder and psychotic disorder has schizoaffective disorder. And there's a lot of us out there. I'm not the only one. So let's talk about bipolar disorder in general. It's an illness that affects a person's ability to regulate their moods. So naturally, this is going to affect your relationship. I've been in many relationships over the years, and for 10 years, I was in a relationship with an absolutely wonderful man who had bipolar 1. And I wrote my first book, Loving Someone with Bipolar Disorder, about being the partner of someone with bipolar. So you can imagine, I'm in a relationship where 2 people have bipolar, so we certainly had to learn how to manage this illness. Today, let's talk about keeping a relationship loving and stable when a partner has bipolar. The first thing is to understand what bipolar disorder actually does to a person. This morning, I knew I was going to have this webinar, so guess what? Last night, my mind started thinking about it and wouldn't stop. I'm not nervous. I don't get nervous in front of the camera. I don't get nervous in front of people. But when I have to be at a certain place at a certain time, or when someone else is depending on me, or I have to figure out if this webinar video is going to work, or who's walking upstairs and what's the lighting, my bipolar disorder starts to go crazy. It's very, very upsetting to be an intelligent, educated, regular person and then have an illness that decides to take over my life simply because I have the trigger of doing a webinar. So one thing to remember, especially if you're a partner of someone with bipolar disorder, is that we're often not in control of the symptoms that just overwhelm us. We can prevent them, especially through medications, especially through using the ideas that you'll find in my books and other people's programs by preventing triggers and having lifestyle changes. But for many of us, this is an illness that just drops on top of us like a blanket, and all we can do is do our best when it happens. So for example, right now, the anxiety that I'm feeling means that as a person with bipolar who has a lot of anxiety, I'm just honest with everybody about what I need. So how about if we start there? When you're in a relationship with someone who has bipolar disorder, honesty is required. How does the bipolar make you feel if you're the person who has the illness? Why can you not go to a concert when everybody else is going, or go watch a football match, or go to the surprise party that everybody wants you to go to? And what does it feel like to be the partner who doesn't have the symptoms and wonders why everything affects your partner so strongly when you can just walk through life with relative ease? Be honest about it. Find a middle ground. That's why step 1 of figuring out how to have a stable and loving relationship when you have bipolar disorder is what I call treat bipolar first. So as I breathe and calm myself down and remind myself that this webinar is for those of us who have the illness, I have to think of my bipolar disorder right now. If I hear a voice that says, Julie, your hair looks stupid, or if I start to think that I'm no good, or I listen to what my brain tells me, I might stop doing what I'm doing, but I don't allow that. I treat my bipolar first. I breathe, I'm ready for my symptoms, and I get out into the world. So as a couple, when bipolar disorder is unmanaged, you will have problems. You don't need me to tell you that. You're going to know that. So by treating bipolar first, you get to remove the main obstacle that's in your relationship, and that's mood swings. How do you treat bipolar first? What does it look like? First of all, get a correct diagnosis. There's a big difference between bipolar 1, bipolar 2, and schizoaffective disorder, for example. Many of us also have a lot of secondary problems, such as I have a head injury that causes a lot of extra anxiety. So anyone who's in a relationship with me gets the full package. They get mania, depression, anxiety, irritation and anger, psychosis, and a lot of other behaviors that you wouldn't get in a regular relationship. But guess what? Because I treat bipolar first, my symptoms do not negatively affect the other people in my life like they used to. Make a pact with each other as a team. We will find a system that works. We will use Julie's books, such as Loving Someone with Bipolar Disorder, to prevent the bipolar conversation. We will learn to manage the illness above all else. Because if you had diabetes in a relationship, especially diabetes that required insulin, if you took a trip or you were going to get married and you were discussing the diet or the spread that you were going to have, if you were going to have children and the woman, for example, had diabetes 1, wouldn't you discuss diabetes first? Of course you would. If someone's in a wheelchair, that comes first. It's the same thing with bipolar disorder. And yes, this illness is manageable. Here I am with all these symptoms and I'm sitting here talking to you. Is it easy? No. Do I have to sacrifice a lot to reach my dreams? Of course I do. It's just part of life. So treat bipolar first. That's our motto as we get started. Find a plan that works and go from there. Now, what about dealing with a crisis inside a relationship where someone has bipolar disorder? I'd like to start with a story. In 1994, my much-loved partner, whom is still a good friend of mine, we were together for 10 years, and our relationship changed. We became more like brother and sister than partners, which is why we are now friends versus being in a relationship. But for 10 years, we were extremely close. And in 1994, out of nowhere, my 21-year-old partner got manic and psychotic. I didn't even know what those words were. And I went through the odyssey that many of you have been through, which is having to call the police, having to get someone committed, having to do danger to self or others. I'm lucky that I got to do all of this because HIPAA was not around, which makes it a lot better for the partner when HIPAA is not here. And I had to put my husband into the hospital in restraints and go to court. And my brother became his guardian. And for 3 months, my beloved partner was manic and psychotic, very, very, very ill. And then when he came out of the hospital, there wasn't any help for me at all. And unfortunately, these days, as you know, there's still not a lot of help for partners. And that's why I like to do these videos. We have to take care of ourselves as partners. I got him home and thought things are going to be fine. He's going to take his meds and everything will be okay. Absolutely not. He went into a downswing and became very suicidal, talked about a lot of stuff that people who are suicidal talked about. I had to rush him back to the hospital. He tried to jump out of the car on the freeway. We got him into the hospital. And after that, I can say that his trajectory towards wellness was just wonderful from then on. And since that time, over 20 years, he has remained relatively stable and is very successful in life and having a very good relationship and has a new baby. So please don't think that we cannot have successful relationships when we have bipolar. But here's number 2 that I want to discuss with you. Your relationship as people where a partner has bipolar disorder has to understand something. A partner's experience of a mood swing is completely different than the person with bipolar's experience of the mood swing. Ivan doesn't remember a lot of the stuff that happened when we were in a relationship and he was in the hospital. I remember every single second. I wrote an article about this for the International Bipolar Foundation. You can find a link to that with this video. I remember the color of the walls in the hospital. I remember what it smelled like. I remember being in my car driving up to the psych unit crying. I remember it all. He doesn't. He didn't go through that. And one day he said to me, how dare you let them treat me like they treated me in the hospital? And I said, what do you mean how I let them treat you? You were so sick that they had to do things to calm you down. Your mania and psychosis were so devastating that I couldn't keep you at home. I'm sorry. What do you mean? And at that point, I realized that his experience of his bipolar disorder was nothing like my experience of his episode. So as a couple, as you treat bipolar first, also understand that the partner needs different treatment than the person with the illness. The person with the illness often has a full team around them. Well, you know what? The partner needs a team too. Speaking directly to partners, you need a therapist to talk to about this. You need help. How do I live with someone with chronic illness? How do I deal with something such as a partner having an episode that causes hypersexuality and having an affair that truly is bipolar related, but still means it was an affair? So as you treat bipolar first, start trying to put yourself in the shoes of the other person. That will make an enormous difference in your relationship. I had to sit back and say, you know what? When Ivan was in the hospital, I thought he was safe. But when he was in the hospital, he was scared. Very different experiences. And it's important to discuss this. When you love someone with bipolar disorder, learning to manage the illness, learning to talk with each other, creates something rather dynamic and exciting. Think about it. How many couples do you know who actually have to communicate well? They have to talk about drugs and alcohol. They have to talk about medications. They have to talk about how do we plan a trip so that your partner with bipolar doesn't get manic? How do we talk about finances when a partner has to go on disability? All of those things that might seem like a negative, guess what? In my experience, being in a relationship for 10 solid, a good relationship for 10 years, and then my relationships after that, since my diagnosis of bipolar disorder, my rigorous honesty about what I'm experiencing, not in order to make somebody be responsible for me, but so that I can let somebody join in what I experience and help me in a way that works for them, has actually allowed me to have magnificent relationships. Here's an example. When I meet somebody new, they automatically know that I have bipolar disorder because I'm well known, so they look me up on the internet. I already don't have to go through the, hey, what's bipolar and all this. They've looked me up and they know me. But what they might not know, for example, is that if they want to go out with me, it means that I'll be done by 10:30 at night. Because one of the ways that I manage bipolar disorder is by sleep. So that means if we want to go have a good time, you won't see me drinking anymore because I stopped all of that because my manic drinking got me into too much trouble, including getting herpes, which is not pleasant. I'm very open about my STD. So if you're in a relationship with somebody who has an STD because of mania, you are not alone. Look at me. I'm not an ogre. I have schizoaffective disorder, bipolar with psychosis, and an STD. I'm honest. Of course, it affects my relationships. But by talking honestly about what I do to manage the illness, guess what most people say? They say, wow, you're rather amazing. So if you're in a relationship with someone with bipolar and you're looking for help and you're looking for information, think about how amazing it can be and how close you can become with your partner by treating bipolar first, walking in the other person's shoes, and talking openly about what the illness does to your relationship. It creates a relationship where you get to communicate. You don't have to lie to each other. You don't have to walk around thinking, what's he thinking? What's he doing? Why did she say that? What is she going on about? Because you'll be able to say, well, right now my partner's in an episode. Or if you have the illness, you'll be able to say, I'm sick right now. That's how I communicate with the people in my life, including any romantic partner I might have. Bipolar is part of me. Nobody gets to be in a relationship with me without also understanding my bipolar disorder. I let everybody know what I write about in all of my books. So, for example, we have Loving Someone with Bipolar Disorder, and that's a book about partners, because you guys don't get enough, I don't think. So that's a book for partners. Take Charge of Bipolar Disorder is one of my favorite books that I wrote. Take Charge of Bipolar Disorder will help you as a couple learn how to manage this illness together. It's also great for family members and healthcare professionals. And then I have the book Get It Done When You're Depressed. And Get It Done When You're Depressed was written for those of you who don't always have to deal with mania and anxiety, irritation, and anger. Some of you have relationships where the bipolar disorder is largely depression. And that means somebody having trouble getting out of bed, getting trouble working, crying a lot, saying, I don't love you anymore, or it's not worth being with me, I'm too sick. As you learn to treat bipolar first, walk in each other's shoes, and learn to communicate more about the illness, you'll learn the language of bipolar, and you'll learn what mania, depression, anxiety, psychosis, irritation and anger and focus problems actually look like, so that you can talk about them directly instead of thinking that's what your relationship is all about. Many people often ask me, Julie, do you take medications? Heck yes, I take medications. I have so many mental illnesses. They started at 16. So I started with psychosis. I then had my first hypomanic episode in Europe. And then I had an extremely dangerous suicidal downswing at age 19 when my first boyfriend broke up with me. I have rapid cycling bipolar disorder. And if you actually gave me a diagnosis today, I would have something called ultradian rapid cycling bipolar disorder, which means I can have 6 or 7 mood swings a day. My life is about management. In a relationship, just as with the diabetes, if you put bipolar disorder first and learn to manage it, your relationship can be loving, kind, and long-term. You can raise healthy children by talking with them openly about bipolar. I have a 16-year-old nephew, and I started talking to him appropriately about my bipolar disorder at age 4. So don't think kids can't understand. As long as you know the right language, they can. So today I'm going to close with a lot of positive thinking for people who are in a relationship with bipolar. And I'd like to introduce something I call the bipolar free zone. And that's actually the last chapter in the book that I wrote for the partner, Loving Someone with Bipolar Disorder. What does it mean? Oh my goodness, it can be overwhelming to have this illness in a relationship. But you got into a relationship for a reason. Like many, you might have gotten into this relationship when someone was manic and it was wild and crazy and you had a great time. And now you're dealing with the reality of the illness. That's what happened to me in most of my relationships, including my 2 marriages. But you're together and you want to work together. It's very important to separate bipolar disorder from your relationship itself. Just like with any other illness, bipolar disorder is not who a person is, and it does not define your relationship. So creating what I call the bipolar free zone is essential. Even when you are in a crisis, even when someone's depressed or they've just gotten off of a massive manic episode, or they're anxious or upset or they've lost their job, focusing on time together where you don't discuss illness, you don't discuss what's happening, but you make the decision, even if it's only for a half hour, that you're going to sit and you're going to hold hands and you're going to remember why you were together in the first place. This might be going to a movie, a happy movie, where bipolar is not discussed on the way there and it's not discussed on the way home. It might be doing what I call the door treatment, and that's when you walk into a room, let's say you're going to have a nice dinner. The minute you walk through the door, no bipolar discussion. Now, when you walk out the door, maybe you have to talk about bipolar, you have to talk meds, you have to get serious. But during that time that you are building a foundation of a loving relationship, you don't always have to talk about this illness. Sometimes, especially for men and women, because we have very different communication styles. I'm a big believer in what I call the male-female continuum. Women tend to have an estrogen response to things. What are you doing? What are you taking? Where are you going? How's it going to be? Men often have an action response. Let's take a walk. We don't have to talk about it all the time. Why do you always want to talk to me? So if you're finding yourself on that male-female continuum, and of course not everybody's on there, but a lot are, Try to meet in the middle. Try to understand each other. When you treat bipolar disorder first, when you put yourself in the other person's shoes, especially as a partner, trying to understand the fear that we go through when we have bipolar, or as a person with bipolar, to understand the very different fear that we go through as partners, when you learn to communicate successfully about the illness, and when you create a bipolar-free zone where there is time in your life for you, fun time, sexy time, loving time, responsible time, where you don't have to talk about illness, that creates a loving, beautiful foundation for any relationship. Can you make a relationship where one partner or even both partners who have bipolar disorder work? Absolutely. But does it take work? Of course it does. But then that's life. Everything is hard work if you think about it. I wish you luck. You can find more information at the International Bipolar Foundation website, and you can read more about my work at juliefast.com. I hope you will also join us on Facebook. And I also highly recommend BP Magazine at bphope.com, who work directly with the International Bipolar Foundation to help all of us live stable and healthy lives, happy lives. Thank you so much, and I'll talk to you soon.